Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to another episode with Mind Matters with Kay. Today, I have Jenna Talita from Florida, and she will be discussing situations that are affiliated with eating disorders. Hello, Jenna. How are you today?
Hi, Kay. It's so nice to talk with you.
Likewise,
Thank
likewise.
you.
I thank you for coming. This is the first time I've had this subject matter. I think it's very important because a lot of people experience this or may have children who experience this, especially with the society that we live in. Social media, kids are, they're body shaming, they're comparing their bodies to other
All the
people,
time.
and that can cause, it's cause and effect, right? So people can start to stop eating or start purging after they eat and things of that nature. So I'm super excited to hear your story and see how we can bring awareness to this subject matter that's not so talked about and that's not so out in the open. So without
Yeah.
further ado, I am going to give you the floor.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And yeah, you're right. This really isn't talked about as much.
Mhm.
Um and you're right. There's so much pressure in this world
Yeah.
as a kid or even as an adult.
Mhm.
And because we have all of this pressure to take up less space in this world, and
Yes.
it's around us all the time. Like it's really hard to be anywhere where it's a safe place where you can't get away from it.
Right. Right.
um I mean, like, I'll give you an example. There was I could give you probably a million, but there was an evening I was spending with my family, and we wanted to
Mhm.
watch some TV. So we turned on a sitcom. It was
Mhm.
the more recent George Lopez series that had just come out. And in the
Okay.
very first episode, well, what is it, like 20 minutes because we were watching it on streaming services?
Mhm.
Um, three fat jokes made in that span of 20 minutes.
Mhm.
Another show that I watched, it was an old episode of the King of Queens,
Okay.
and the wife, Leah Remini, at that time she looked very anorexic in that episode. She was very,
Mhm.
very, very thin,
Mhm.
and her husband, obviously he's in a bigger body, and
Mhm.
he found out that her mom was in a bigger body, and he spent the entire episode making sure that she didn't put on any weight. And yeah, it was like, and I was screaming at the TV the whole time, and I was like, I just want to sit down and watch it with my family, and
Yeah.
here we are, we're having it was just very uncomfortable. So
Yeah. I can imagine.
it's around us all the time, and that's just on TV. That's not even like in regular conversation. There was somebody who came to my house one day, was going to come in, fix something in the bathroom, and we were
Mhm.
just having some small talk before, uh and we got onto the subject about how he's getting married soon.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then he got onto the subject about his diet and his restriction, and how he's doing all of this and blah 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 blah, and he just can't get away from it. And it's like,
Yeah.
that's that's one of the hard things about an eating disorder, is that you're not recovering in a bubble, you're recovering in the real world, you
Yeah.
know.
And doing it out loud sometimes can be more of a struggle than
Mhm.
excuse me, than actually trying to lose the weight. I think it's important for people to be comfortable in who they are and
Mhm.
not allow the opinions of others or societal norms to disrupt what they feel or or just basically, yeah, like what they feel in their bodies.
Yeah.
Do you think that it's been an uptick since the invention of social media? Do you think that exacerbates it?
It can definitely make it worse, but there are people on social media like myself who are about learning how to love your body as it is, without trying to take up less space, and learning how to have a better relationship with food. And there
Right.
is that community on there. So if you look for it, you can quote
Mhm.
unquote cleanse your social media palette there and make it all geared towards that or other things that are not related to it. But yeah, there is a lot of pressure on there, especially because we can think, oh, that person has a magical life. It's the life I want, and it's because they're a certain type of way. And that doesn't mean that's how that is.
This is very
Um,
true. This is very
yeah.
true. Have you had your own personal experiences with eating disorders?
Yes, yes, I have. Throughout my whole life, I've had a questionable relationship with food now that I look back on it.
Mhm.
But there was one point in my life that was more prominent than others. It was the end of my marriage, and my husband at the time decided to blame his cheating on the fact that I was fat. And yes, yes. Yeah, and see, I kind of wish that I had that look on my face when he said that. But instead, I was crushed. I was just
Of
it was
course.
it
Of
just it
course.
it just totally tore me up because it was like, like I at the time I wasn't in a really great mindset, and
Mhm.
to hear that and blame it on me, it felt like it was my fault.
No,
And
no.
yeah, but now looking at it now, I know that it really wasn't.
Right.
Um but um but at that time I was thinking, oh my gosh, in order to find a relationship that's going to be good for me, in order to be successful as a dietitian,
Mhm.
in order to have all of my problems answered, I needed to be in a smaller body. And so I ended up putting myself on this ridiculous restriction. It
Mhm.
was so ridiculous, it was very hard to explain because there were all of these rules that I put in place.
Right.
And I ended up, it was kind of just a simple way of explaining it was that it was like a takeoff of low carb, but I made it no carb.
Mhm.
And everything had to be made at home and all of this other stuff. And it was just very, very restrictive. I didn't let myself eat away from the house. Everything had to be made from scratch. Uh, and when I would go to the gym, which wasn't really my favorite thing to do, but the
Mhm.
one that I hated the least was the elliptical. And so I got onto the elliptical, and they have that heart rate monitor on the screen. And in my brain at the time, being in the healthy range for that wasn't good enough. I needed to be higher in order to make it feel like I was working out. And so I could have the sweat, and I could feel like the out of breath and things like that. It didn't feel like that was enough for me, so I ended up working out to these levels that weren't safe. And by the
Okay.
time I got off of the machine, well, I was completely bored on the machine too. It was just
Mhm.
so boring. but
Mhm.
um but when I got off, I just felt so exhausted, and people were telling me, "You're supposed to feel energized after you're done
Yeah.
working out,"
Yeah.
and I didn't. I felt very tired. So, anyways, and it got to a point where I burnt myself out so much on that that
Mhm.
when I would go to the gym, I would actually sit in my car and stare at the gym and not want to go inside. And there were times I even just let myself leave without even going inside,
Mhm.
um, because I just couldn't step foot in there. It was just too much.
It
So
sounds like it was because it was forced. It wasn't something that you was ready to do. Sounds like it was more so as a result of what your ex mean husband said to you. So
it
I'm gonna let
was,
you finish, but I do have some things that I
yeah,
want to say about that. Uh,
yeah.
because number one, grown-ups communicate. And if you were like before I finished, were you that weight when you guys got married, or did you gradually gain weight as the marriage progressed?
Um, I I was naturally in a bigger body, but I had done a lot of chronic dieting throughout the years, and
Okay.
so my weight ended up going back, or well, it slowly increased from there because of that chronic dieting.
So it
So
fluctuated throughout the marriage.
it did.
Did he
Um,
ever have a conversation with you about his, concern about your weight gain?
Um, actually, no, at the time he was okay. But he had grown up in a house that was very fat phobic, and so he kind of put on a front like it was okay, but in day-to-day conversations, he was very he would put in those things, or he would look at, women who were in smaller bodies, or different things like that, and I didn't really notice it at the time. Well, I did notice it, but I didn't really put two and two together at the time.
But
It
he
was
never
kind of
came to
very
you and said, "Listen, Jenna, we need to talk. We need to have a conversation." That never happened.
It wasn't, but even if it were, and I know this is probably going to sound a little backwards, but that would have been really overstepping boundaries because that's my body and my body size.
Mhm.
And being in a bigger body doesn't mean that it's unhealthy as much as we get that messaging. Because there could be people in any body size at any range of health. It doesn't mean a smaller one's going to be automatically healthier.
No, at all, and especially if the people are bulimic, that's completely unhealthy because of what they're doing to their body with regurgitating. Um,
Yeah,
the only reason why I asked that was because I cringe when I hear people or couples who blame their cheating on the other person, and I feel like
yeah,
cheating is a choice. And
it
in
is.
relationships, especially marriage, communication is key. So if
Yeah,
there was a concern, he needed to, in my mind, I feel like he owed he owed you a conversation, and not to just take it upon himself to satisfy what he thought would be satisfying simply because of your appearance. I think it's a crutch.
I
I think it's an excuse.
yeah, it was. It was completely an excuse, and it was also because he's also a recovering alcoholic. At the time, he was full blown alcoholic,
Okay.
and I think, looking back on what was going on, I think it was easier for him to belittle me than
Hmm.
recognize what was going on with himself,
Yep.
and to take a responsibility of his own stuff, because this wasn't really about my body. This
Yeah.
wasn't really about me at all.
At
Um,
all.
this was there. Of course, there were things in the marriage that could have definitely been improved, but
Mhm.
um, but to blame it on me and not take any action or responsibility himself, that was him.
That was
And
crap. It was an
yeah,
excuse.
it was very much crap. And
Mhm.
unfortunately, where I was in my mindset at the time, um it 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 was easy for me to absorb it and internalize
Mhm.
it as my own,
Yep.
because I did, even though at the time it wasn't anything that I felt needed to be treated,
Yeah.
my self-esteem and my body image was not very good.
Mhm.
And because it's so normalized, I thought it was just women are supposed to feel like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um and so it was just easy for him to find a weakness in me
Mhm.
and know where to push the button. And
Yeah. And that's a shame. I'm sorry that you went through that, because I could only imagine, again, people internalize other people's opinions at times. And I
it's
couldn't
so true.
imagine my husband. I mean, I'm not married. I'm just saying in like the third person. I couldn't
Yeah,
imagine someone I'm with saying, I cheated because of you. And you get like, no, you cheated because you decided to cheat. That had nothing to do with me.
right. It
That's their own mindset, and that's them battling their own demons,
Yeah.
because he had a choice to just be like, all right, the marriage isn't working. That may
Mhm.
hurt, but I think that what he said exacerbated that hurt. He could have left it clean and just been like, the marriage is just not working out for me anymore. I think we're better off as friends. You'd have been able to process that hurt in a different capacity
Yes.
versus him being mean and basically saying that your weight was why he cheated. Like, I'm glad that you're in a different headspace, because you should
Yes.
never take that on. That had nothing to do with you, sweetheart, at all.
Thank you.
You're
Thank you.
welcome.
I wish you were there at the time.
I'd
So,
have probably popped him in his head, like, don't you say that.
Yeah, exactly. I, and while yeah, I honestly wish that I had not gone through that hurt. That
Mhm.
was really just, it was something else, and I wouldn't
Yeah,
have wished that on anybody. But
yeah.
it was actually, I felt like it was the beginning of my self-love journey. And
There you go.
if I didn't go through something like that, I probably still would have been where I was. So sometimes, even though it it sucks to high heaven, I
Yeah,
I don't know, this kind of was needed. So,
right.
and
I
now,
always go ahead, I'm sorry.
oh, sorry, I was just gonna say, now I'm able to see things from a different perspective that I really wasn't able to see at that time.
Yes.
So,
And that's a good thing. That's a good thing because, going through it and being in that moment is never it never feels good, right?
no,
But once you get beyond it and you're able to look at it retrospectively, you're like, okay, shit happens so the shift can happen.
yeah,
Sometimes I said to another viewer, sometimes things don't happen to us, they happen for us. And
yes,
enduring it is not the most comfortable, but the perseverance thereafter is what gives you the gratitude and a different mindset. So at least, he hurt you, but he helped you in the same token
he
because
did.
it got you to, look at yourself and reevaluate and start to love yourself more and to just, be okay with who you are and what you look like. If you're fine with it, who cares what anybody else thinks?
Yeah,
Sure.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so, yeah, because honestly, I wouldn't have been able to. Um, I started working with this amazing therapist who really just
Okay.
helped me so much with
Mhm.
my self compassion journey,
Good.
and she's the one who initially introduced me to intuitive eating, which is what actually helped me get over that hump with
Okay.
like feeling better about myself. And so, um, it was kind of a funny thing how it came about because um I was I got a job at a drug rehab center,
Okay.
and a lot of the people, as they were coming off their drugs or alcohol, they ended up resorting to their eating disorder behaviors. And at the time, I didn't have a lot of experience helping people with that.
Mhm.
So I did some research, and I found out about intuitive eating really helps people. And so I started reading the book, and while I had my clients in mind, it felt like the book was written for me. And at the time, even though I went through all that, even though I had been a dietitian for a long time before that, I
Mhm.
didn't realize that what I was doing was, you know, really an eating disorder. And so it just, it made everything make sense to me.
Okay.
Why diets don't work, why we feel the way we do about food,
Mhm.
why we have that food police voice in our head, how we feel about our bodies, all of these different things. It really just, it made everything fall into place. But I was also at the same time screaming at the book because it was a completely different way of thinking about things.
Right. Right. So
um
were you did like
yeah,
once he said that, like were you in and I know some people like when they are stressed out, they become emotional eaters. Or sometimes they don't eat at all. So was there like as a result of what he said to you, did you become an emotional eater or did you kind of start trying to scale back? I know earlier on you said that you were on a diet, but
yeah,
how
yes, sorry to interrupt.
no, you're
Yes,
fine.
um I was in that very restrictive sense because what I was dealing with is actually, it's an eating disorder called orthorexia, which is
Okay.
healthy eating to the millionth degree. Everything had to match a certain nutrition profile in
Mhm.
order for me to be able to eat it. It had to be cooked in a certain type of way in order to eat it. So it wasn't necessarily your anorexia or your bulimia. There was some purging because I was doing that excessive exercising, but it wasn't your those two. There's actually a number of different eating disorders.
Right.
um, and so when it comes to your emotional eating question, it actually turns out I have been an emotional eater for most of my life.
Okay.
um, when I was growing up, if ever I had an emotional boo boo, so to speak, my
Mhm.
mom would give me food and she'd say this was boo boo food. And so,
Cute.
you know, and it was supposed to make me feel better after all of that. So, like, I always learned that whenever I felt a certain type of way, food was always the one to go to for that.
Okay.
And this book also, intuitive eating, also addresses that as well. So it's yeah, so
That's
I was,
really
I
that's really
navigated through that too.
that's really, really interesting. Could you explain a little bit of what intuitive eating encompasses for people that may not know?
Sure, exactly. Um, so intuitive eating is a way of tuning out all of the noise about all of the rules that we have about eating, all of the everybody's input about what eating is supposed to be,
Mhm.
and instead learning how to listen to what your own body is saying.
Okay.
We have this ability when we're first born. You know,
Mhm.
babies cry when they're hungry, and then when
Right.
they're fed, they're comfortable. They go to sleep. They're happy. Um, they know how to listen to what their body's saying. But
Mhm.
as we get older, we have well-intentioned people in our lives. We have social media. We have ev- everything around us that tells us that we're supposed to be eating in a certain type of way.
Mhm.
And like maybe even like the clean plate club, where we have to finish everything on our plate, or we have to uh everything always has to have like a green vegetable on it, and we,
Mhm.
we have to do this and we have to do that, and we can't have this past a certain time, and blah 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 blah, all of these
Yes.
particular rules and stuff. And intuitive eating is a way of kind of coming more into what your body's saying and
Mm.
listening to what it needs at that time. And it takes time to build up that trust, especially if you've been living for a while within these rules.
Mhm.
But when we can start tuning into that, then it makes it easier, and we feed our bodies how our bodies need to be fed.
Okay.
So it's
Okay. That's
it's not a,
interesting.
yeah, it's a really cool thing, and it goes more into the psychology of eating, rather, and just kind of developing that better relationship with food and body. um a lot of people can really quickly and wrongly attribute it to like a hunger fullness diet, but it's not a hunger fullness diet, because we don't life doesn't happen that way. Sometimes we have to eat before we're hungry. Sometimes it's like Thanksgiving or Christmas or something, and we're eating because
Mhm.
it's so delicious and amazing, you know?
Yes. Ooh,
Um,
yes. I'm a
yes,
foodie, so yes, I
yeah,
understand it 100%.
exactly, exactly. But in essence, it's really more about tuning into what your body is saying and kind of getting into that rhythm where you and your body can kind of have that better communication with each other.
Okay.
Um,
That makes
so
sense. So
yeah, go ahead.
do you think that, as I listen to you explain the intuitive eating,
Yeah,
I wonder if, and maybe you can correct me because maybe you've read this in the book as well, but I
sure.
wonder if children's upbringings is a contributing factor to that because I know in my household you had to eat everything on your plate. It
Yeah,
wasn't no question about whether you liked it, whether it was, you just needed to clean your plate. And that it becomes a learned behavior, similar to, we weren't allowed to really drink as we ate. We needed to eat our food and it was drinking after. And at 40 years old, I really don't drink while I'm eating. I eat my food and then I drink. But then, once you do drink, it swells up your intake. So I wonder if some children, like you said, with your mother, you had boo boo food. So I
yeah.
wonder if because that's a learned behavior, is that something that is a contributing factor to the intuitive eating because this is what you learned as a child?
Yeah, and these were probably more of the well-intentioned type of situations where,
Okay.
because I I kind of understand like maybe where your parents were coming from with the not drinking while you're eating part of
Mhm.
things.
Mhm.
Because looking at the how my son eats with his food,
Mhm.
there was a time when he would. drink before he ate, and then he would get very, very full with his
Yes.
fluid, and then he wouldn't want to eat anything.
Yes.
And it's understandable. It
Oh yeah,
happens. It
100%.
happens. But yeah, but holding that rule firm, even if like let's say that you ate something that was a little bit dry, like maybe you had a cracker or something and it was really dry and you needed something to kind of wash
Yes.
it down with,
Yes.
that's where maybe that rule wouldn't have been completely supportive, because you
Right.
needed something to drink that down with.
Oh, yeah. I
Um,
mean, retrospectively, I don't look at it as a bad thing. It was just because, as you were talking, that's just something that kind of
exactly.
came into my mind. I think that it is a good rule to have because, like you said, when children are getting so full on their drink, they're not going to eat their food, which is why my parents enforce that, which is not a bad thing because with my kids, I did the same thing. You're not you
Yeah,
can have a few sips, but you're not going to sit there and get full off that. So
exactly.
it's definitely not a bad thing, or like a punishment type of thing.
No, no,
But I
no.
just didn't know if that was something like a because that's a learned behavior. I didn't know if that was
It
something that
is.
they spoke on in the book.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I think that there's some places where these things can definitely be supportive in one way or another.
Mhm,
I
mhm.
think where it gets to be a little, it starts to become unsupportive, is when we take them as all or nothing, and that that we can't be flexible with anything, like that
Yeah,
always has to be how it goes. um you know uh, and when you were talking about the cleaning your plate and making sure that you ate it whether or not you liked it, that is part of that. Yes, that is
okay.
part of that, because and it's understandable, because if your parents or their parents came from financial hardship, and they had food insecurity, then having whatever food was available was important. And so you
Absolutely.
know there was there was this pressure to make sure that you ate, because, and God forbid, a million times, we didn't know if we were going to get some sooner, it
Mhm,
was going to be
mhm.
later. So there was that imprint put into our brain that we
Right,
needed to finish what was on our plate, whether or not. But the
right.
fact of the matter is that if we end up getting to a place where we're satisfied, then that's what our body needs.
Yeah.
The amount that we put onto a plate is arbitrary.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
not necessarily what your particular body needed at that particular moment. You might actually need a little bit more than that. You might
Mhm.
need a little bit less than that, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that was the what your body needed. And when it comes to the stuff that you didn't really care for, yes, I understand, and there is an aspect of making sure we're giving our bodies things that help us feel well and work well and all of that.
Mhm. Mhm.
But if there's things on there that you really don't care for, it can take away that satisfaction from the meal. And it can also even turn into something like a traumatic event,
Mhm.
where if if there can be some times like where it feels like uh it's a battle of wits, or a control thing, like,
Mhm.
no, I'm the parent, you're the child, you're going to listen to me, kind of thing. Whether or not you like it, you're going to do what I say. And it can kind of turn traumatic,
Yeah.
and the instead of, like, you know being curious about it, non-judgmental about it, it becomes more of just forcing, and the kids can actually end up having a bad situation with that food and never want to touch it again because of that situation.
That is 100% true. I think I was traumatized growing up, with certain foods, like, and it wasn't like in a very bad way, like you would get beat type of, situation, but
Yeah,
there are just certain foods that we had to eat that I didn't care for. And I think
yeah,
that every situation, to support what you just said, every situation is not a one size fits all. Everything
right,
is situational, like you said, depending on, whether you were in poverty, depending on whether it's a struggle between parents and child. I think that, when you get older, it plays a role. You know what I mean? I think that it definitely, like, because at now you're able to eat what you want and what you don't want, but it just really depends. And like I said, every situation is different, every household is different for whatever reason. But
it's true. Coming back to my son, he actually had an eating disorder. Well, he still kind of has moments of it, but he had something that's called ARFID, which is Avoidant Restriction Food Intake Disorder.
Okay.
And it's pretty much picky eating to the millionth degree. And he only had like 5 safe foods that he would eat, and that was it. He wouldn't touch anything else. If it was a different brand of that particular type of food, he wouldn't eat it. And it was very, very challenging. And it's a new diagnosis, not because this is a new condition, but because people are starting to recognize that it exists.
Mhm.
Um, and there was a time when he went over to a family member's house and I wasn't there, and they were forcing him to eat macaroni and cheese, the Kraft mac and cheese or whatever, and he didn't like it because of the sensory aspects of it. Um, and the person forced him to eat it, and now he won't touch it to save his life because he had that
How old was he
situation.
at that time?
So he experienced like the height of this, he experienced between about 3 and 10. That was kind of the peak of this. He
Okay.
started to introduce some more foods. He still won't touch certain things,
Mhm.
but for that particular time, yeah, he was a young kid. And that parent, or that the grandparent who was there, he thought it was a willpower thing, and he was just pushing it. And Mason ended up vomiting because of it, and it was just it created this food aversion that he never ate again of those
Yeah.
things.
I think that these type of conversations are vital because this gives people awareness. Because just hearing this, we could have applied that back in the day, but back in the day was just different rules, a different
Yeah.
time in society, and the society we live in now are trying to take strides in recognizing certain conditions. For him to be 3 years old, for me, like I'm a texture person and I eat with my
Yeah,
eyes. If I don't like the way something
that's
looks, I'm not eating it.
exactly, that's
You
what
know,
he was, that's what he does.
right. And the fact that he was 3 years old, like because all right, so when he was three, you noticed that he was being picky with his eating. Were you like concerned that he had an eating disorder, or did you just take it as he's a child, he's trying to learn what he likes and what he doesn't like? Or did it actually ring an alarm for you?
It was, yeah, it rang an alarm for me, but I was also in that mindset that it was a willpower thing, and I was also in the height of my eating disorder at that time.
Okay.
And so I just yeah, so there I was putting a lot of pressure on him to eat and
Mhm.
do all of these things. And then once I finally healed my relationship with food, when I finally learned techniques of being able to, there's something that Ellen Satter talks about. She's a well-known dietitian
Mhm.
who works with children like who have picky eating and things like this.
Mhm. Mhm.
And she has something called the division of responsibility, and it's the parents' responsibility to offer the food,
Okay.
the place of the food, the timing of the food, etc., all of those things, and then it's up to the child to decide if and how much they want to have. And the
Okay.
minute that the parent tries to do what the child's supposed to do, that's when World War III happens. So, and there were
So
times where I felt like I needed a glass of wine after I was done feeding him. But, but,
I am sure.
yes. So, but the minute that I decided to just let him, I just gave him the food. I offered it to him, made it available to him. If he wanted to have it, it was okay. If he didn't want to have it, it was okay. And then all of a sudden, things started changing. and he started eating more. And I mean, it was over time. It wasn't like a, snap of the
Yeah,
fingers and all of a sudden he's a different kid.
right. It was
But
gradual.
he he did start wanting to experiment in his own timeline. And it wasn't about me, it wasn't about my control stuff, it was just about letting him do whatever he was going to do in his time. I made it available, he made the choice of whether and when he wanted to have it.
Okay.
So when I did that, things definitely became a lot easier. And I also didn't feel that pressure that it was my job to make sure that he put it into his mouth and swallowed it.
Right. So, what would you say to parents who, because the society we live in now, a lot of people like, when you're like 40 plus, a lot of people feel like this world is super soft now. Like, there's no structure, there's no guidance. No, I'm not going to say guidance, but there's no real structure. So, as a parent who allowed their child to be autonomous in their eating, what would you say to parents who will hear what you just said and say, that's giving too much, that's giving that child too much freedom in terms of their eating. Like, if I say you're going to eat this, you're going to eat this. But
Yeah.
for you see how your situation worked out. So what would you say to parents who thinks that that was a little
Lenient.
yes, yes, perfect, yes, thank you.
Yeah. I get it. I get it because in my head, I was, you know, I felt like I needed to sit there and be the food police, and I needed to make sure that that kid understood, and he ate his food, and he knew about the hungry children around the world that were starving, and
Hmm.
all of that did not work. And it was
Right.
just making me pull my hair out, and I was at
Hmm.
my wits end, and this child was not eating and he was losing weight, and it was not a good situation, and something needed to change. And while and I understand if people are screaming at the show right now. I understand it because I was screaming at this stuff when I was first learning about it too.
Yeah.
But the fact is that where where this concern is coming from is the anxiety within yourself that you're not doing a good enough job. It's not actually that the child is trying to be ornery. It's actually that my son in particular was having sensory issues,
Right.
serious sensory issues. And forcing that on him was making him traumatized.
Yeah.
So so when we can kind of recognize where our own anxiety is coming from, and that it's okay, and while that freedom seems uncomfortable and it seems unknown, and like we're gonna just let these kids run around like with their heads cut off or something like that,
Hmm. Hmm.
it doesn't necessarily happen that way. It is a process. So I mean, if you try this out and you're like, oh my god, Jenna, this didn't work, what are you talking about?
Hmm.
I get it. It's a process. It's a process that happens on its own timeline. And when we can give them that freedom to explore,
Hmm.
it opens things up. And that's something I talk about with my clients, especially with their own relationship with food, is
Yeah.
that when we can come at this with from a place of curiosity and compassion
Hmm.
rather than a place of judgment and
Hmm.
control, it opens doors up. You can figure out what the big picture is and be able to figure out what's actually really going on here and how to best support yourself.
Right.
If you're coming from control and a judgment place, it makes people want to crawl up in a fetal position, or they get defensive and they don't want to
Mhm.
deal with it, and the situation just festers, you know?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, as I said earlier, I think it's not a one size fits all type of
Mhm.
ordeal. Everyone's
Sure.
different. Everyone's child is different, and every child may not like a certain food because of their own, like you said, sensory issues. I'm texture. Some
Yeah,
people, it may be the smell, whatever the case
could
may
be.
be, it does not apply to everyone. But
It's
I
true.
just understand that some people feel like parents are too lenient, which is why I asked that question. And other parents will be very supportive,
It's
but
a
again, that's the world we live in. Everybody has their own opinions. You know what I mean? So,
it's so true. And one thing I will just as a little piece to think about.
Mhm.
With those kinds of foods that you're trying to force or highly encourage, let's call it,
Mhm.
to the child, there are other foods that still offer those same kinds of benefits
Okay.
that might be more um, tolerated or appreciated. It just because that particular food, like let's say that we're talking about broccoli or something like that,
Mhm.
there's so many other foods that offer those same types of characteristics, and it doesn't
Okay.
have to be that particular food that that child eats in order to make that happen or to get what they need.
Right.
In in other case scenarios, you know, in that time when my son was only having like 5 foods, there
Mhm.
were other ways that I was supporting his nutrition, like with Carnation Breakfast Essentials or with a multivitamin or different things like that, to make
Mhm.
sure that his body was getting what he needed in case he didn't want the other types of foods that could offer that.
Okay.
So,
So at least
yes.
you had an alternative solution. It wasn't just, okay, you don't want to eat this, here go a honey bun.
Yeah.
At least you did the research, but a lot of people may not. I'm not going to say they're just not going to do it. Some people may not know how to go about it,
Yeah.
but you just dropped the gem because if
Yeah.
people, if broccoli has, a good source of vitamin K, you can find out what other vegetable offers that same amount of vitamin K to offer them a different option. But some
Exactly.
parents just feel like, nope, my way, and this is my house, and that's that. But people don't realize that some children may have a condition, um,
Yeah.
which incubates this situation. It's not that they just don't want to eat it or they're not, they're being defiant. Sometimes it takes us a little bit of um, awareness and research to see whether our child is, you know, um, suffering from something that we can't see on the surface. So
So
that was a good point that you made.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad.
Yeah.
So, and I hope that offers some parents some support there too.
Listen, you taught me some things as well. So, which is a good thing because, again, every situation, everybody struggles with different things. And I could come across someone who has, a child that's not, eating what they want or what they feel that the child should be eating. And now I have a little bit of knowledge of how to go about it and what should be done, or I can even, point them to in your direction to help them. You just never, but a lot of people just don't know how to go about it.
That's
So
true.
that's a good thing. That's why, like I said, I like to have different conversations because it's not a one size fits all. Everybody
That's
struggles with
true.
something different. But I'm glad to see that you've overcome, you've persevered from something that harmed you, that made you now more fruitful, more knowledgeable to help other
Yes.
people. So what would you say to anyone who is having a food crisis in a sense? Like, do you have any advice for people who are in your shoes or who could potentially be walking in your shoes at some point?
Yeah. Well, um, you know, there's so many. So trying to pick one. Um, I would say first and foremost, you deserve to eat, no matter what your body size is. You don't have to restrict yourself just because you're in a bigger body. And you deserve to take up space, no matter what size your body
Mhm,
is.
mhm,
Um, and that we can work to feel well and feel good about our bodies, and inside our bodies,
mhm,
without having to fight with the scale and without having to think that our food is evil.
mhm.
So yeah.
That's great. That's a great thing. You just never know who you're helping. And I will kind of piggyback off of that. I want people to understand that as long as you feel comfortable in the body that you're in, no one else's opinions matter, and only you have the power to validate or invalidate their opinions. If you feel comfortable in your skin, as long as the doctor is not saying, "Hey, listen, you are in jeopardy of having a heart attack or a stroke," then
Yeah.
of course you would want to probably do something to ensure that you do not embark down that road. However, if you are comfortable and you don't have any health issues, you
Mhm.
are entitled, as Jenna said, to take up space.
You
No
are.
one can tell you how big or small you should be. If you feel comfortable, I say go for it. Period.
And that's a whole nother conversation that we could have right there, because
Mhm,
actually, um there's a lot of medical fat phobia out there,
mhm.
and a lot of blaming on weight that's actually not the real issue at
Okay.
hand for
Okay.
those things. So even if the doctors do say that you need to be smaller in order to be healthier, there's still things that you can do for your body that can be helpful and manage
Mhm.
those different issues without fighting with the scale. But that's a whole nother conversation. So
Yeah. But but you know what? You made me think of something. And I'm not ashamed of how, my weight. It's
yeah.
probably going to sound crazy on here, but I mean, I'm all about transparency. So to support what you just said, I will say that societal norms has the ability to make us think differently. So I stepped on a scale. I bought a scale. Well, I
Okay.
went to my primary for a checkup.
Yeah.
And when I got on the scale, I was like, your scale's broke. There is no way that, the lady started laughing. So I really was in my head like, what? So I bought myself a scale, a digital scale, and it syncs to an app on my phone.
Okay.
And when I jumped on the scale, I was 187.
Okay.
And for my age bracket, it said obese. And I bust out laughing like, damn, obese? I ain't obese, but that is according to the medical standpoint. I'm far from obese. but
Exactly. When
but if
when
you're
I
not
was
careful, you'll adopt that in that mentally. I'm not obese. I don't know what they're talking about. I'm good.
when when I had lost a significant amount of weight from my eating disorder, let me put it
Mhm.
this way. When I was at my highest point of my weight, um my blood pressure, my blood sugar, and my cholesterol were all in a good place. They
Okay.
were actually even low. And when after I had lost a significant amount of weight, my cholesterol shot up and so did my blood pressure. I
Mhm.
was in a smaller body at that time. And it was really confusing for me
Mhm.
because according to my BMI, I was still in the quote unquote overweight category. But if you looked at a picture of me, I looked very unwell. And
You see?
and I could really dive into a whole bunch of stuff, but I
Yeah.
I know we want to keep this on a reasonable time limit, so I won't dive into that. But we could talk another time about
Absolutely.
where that
Absolutely.
sketchy history comes from, because there's a lot of bull.
Yeah.
Um, there's a lot of bull of where those numbers and where those descriptions came from. So
Yes. Yes.
I'll
Yes.
save that as like a little teaser.
Yeah, I definitely would love for you to come back so we can have that conversation because a lot of times people don't understand where these numbers come from, where it derives from.
Yeah,
And it's kind of just is projected out into society, and we think that we have to keep up with these norms. And like I said, although the scale was broke, the one at the doctor's office and mine was broke, I'm still comfortable. Like if I
yeah,
want to lose a few pounds, I will. But again, I don't consider being obese, but according to my BMI, I was. But whatever. That's your opinion. I'm good. And that's that. So but everybody doesn't have that attitude. You know what I mean? Some
yeah.
people would see that in their BMI
And
and they're
get
like, oh my
scared.
God, obese. Let me start, carroting up.
And
And like, I'm not doing, I'm still gonna eat. Still gonna eat.
and you know what? It's because we associate our worth and value. There's so much negativity that comes with
Yep.
being in a big body. Like there's so many associations of what that means
Yep.
that people don't want to live like that. They don't want to have that connotation just because they're in a bigger body. But the
Yeah.
issue is not that we're in bigger bodies, it's the way that our society views bigger bodies.
Yep.
And so, yeah. But
And
anyways,
honestly, everybody doesn't want to be a size two.
and
It's a
it's yeah, it's not a size two. I mean, even if you're talking about just one size different or 10 pounds or something, that's still being in a smaller body.
right.
And it doesn't necessarily mean that because you're smaller that you're automatically healthier. There's plenty of people I work with who are in a variety of different bodies, and the smaller ones have the same health issues that the bigger bodies do, but the bigger bodies get
100%.
told to lose weight and the smaller bodies get the treatments.
Right,
So,
right. There's
yes.
there's just so, like you said, that we can go on so
Yeah.
many different routes for this
Oh
because,
gosh,
it's insane the way that,
it is
society pushes a narrative of, if you're skinnier, you're healthier, which like you said, is not always the truth,
not.
and sometimes when people are obese according to societal norms and they become anorexic, well, bulimic, in an effort to become anorexic, you are now putting them in a mental health issue, a mental
Exactly.
illness, because
Ex-
that's a mental illness, not really mental health. So you're now
yeah,
giving them, you're projecting them into a different realm where it's completely unhealthy to regurgitate, and it's completely unhealthy to remain so small because now you really are
exactly.
going to open up an avenue of health issues by
And
going either route, right?
there's also it's kind of a crappy how they came up with this, but there's another diagnosis that's called atypical anorexia. The only reason why it's called atypical is because the people are in a bigger body. So they are still exhibiting anorexia where they're restricting their eating, and not getting enough to eat throughout the day, um, or they'll go. Yeah, there's so many different ways it shows up, but there you can be anorexic in a bigger body. It's just called atypical because you don't match the BMI standards. So,
Right.
yeah, so it and you're right. This really does, like, it's a crazy number of maybe like 3 out of 5 dieters go into eating disorders
Mhm.
and or disordered eating. And it's crazy about how often that happens, and it's just because of the way we view bigger bodies.
Do you have, by chance, I mean, I know, this is just me as you were talking. Do you know where the BMI standards come from? Like who came up with these BMI numbers?
I would love to answer that for you. It just depends on how long you want this to be.
Okay.
So,
Well, it
um,
wouldn't be the World Health Organization. Who?
they do have their own height and weight tables, but it was before that. It was before
Okay.
that.
Okay.
Um, it was actually, I'll give you a little bit of a taste of it. It started off with this man, this white European man over in the late 1800s,
Hmm.
who wasn't in the health field at all. He was actually a mathematician. And he just liked playing with numbers. He liked categorizing things based off numbers,
Hmm.
and he decided to use people as those numbers,
Hmm.
or because we're filled with them. And but the only people that he actually measured were other white European males like himself. He did not get any women. He did not get any other races. He did not get any other cultures or countries or anything like that. It was other white European males like himself, and that was only just the beginning of it all. So that there's like a whole other bunch of stuff that came with that too.
Okay.
And so yeah, so when you're taking a look at that number, understand that that number actually really does have a lot of racist and misogynistic roots to it.
And I'm
So,
glad you said that because, I try to be careful of what I say on here because I don't want to offend anyone, audience, interviewee. But I do feel like not just in the Black community, but the
yeah.
BMI, like we are naturally curvy and thick people.
Yes,
So the BMI, according to the World Health Organization or other agencies, that doesn't really apply to us because we were never meant or
included.
built to be 112 pounds. That's
No,
just not what it is. And it's the same with other, other races as well.
exactly.
But I'm glad you said that. So yeah, that
Yes.
makes a lot of sense.
There's actually a very fascinating book that you might really like. Um, I'll share the link with you, but it does talk
Mhm.
about the racist origins of fatphobia, and it's a amazing book. It talks about all of these different things. So
Yeah.
um, So it's yeah, it's we really need to question about how are they coming up with these numbers, and are they really representative of ourselves, or are we just trying to fit into the BMI box or whatever type of box, but are we trying to fit into that box
Hmm.
to match whatever everybody else is doing? And the fact is that that's not what we're supposed to be. We
No,
come in
we're
different
not.
shapes, sizes, and shades. We're not supposed to look alike.
And wouldn't the world be boring if we all did look alike? That would
Yes,
be kind of corny. Like, I don't want to look like everybody else. Like, I'm
ex-
me. God made you. Like, we're all supposed to be
exactly.
different.
A thing I like to say is, imagine those communities that where all of, like, the houses in the neighborhood match each other. You know,
Hmm.
they're just one right after the next.
Yeah.
The lawns look the same, the houses, everything looks the same. How boring is that?
Telling you, it's super boring. Like, ew. Like, where's the creativity? And, but even, just one more thing too. Like, nowadays, back in the day, it was like if you had a big butt, you were obese, you were fat. But now the world, and it's not just the black culture, it's cultures from everywhere. Everybody
Exactly.
is now getting these surgeries to have a bigger bum, fuller
Yes.
lips. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So it's just like, people need to be comfortable with who they are. And I'm not against BBLs. I feel like people need to do whatever makes them comfortable. I don't
Hmm.
judge that because we don't
Right.
wake up in that person's body. We don't know what they see every day. So
Right.
if they feel like enhancing something on them is going to boost their self-confidence, I say go for it. You know, but it's just funny how society changes. One minute it's okay to be, like a Barbie where you're a size 2 or 3. Big
Yeah.
butts are disgusting. Now it's like having a big butt is like everything, and it's just like, well,
Exactly. And
before, but
like,
it's
if you
just
remember when we were kids, they it was about the heroin body that we all had to have, be like we were on heroin or something.
yes, yes.
And yeah, and it changes. I mean, this has been going on for centuries and stuff like that, and it's
Yeah, I definitely want
so
you to come back to give us a history lesson because
okay.
we could talk about this all day, Jenna. Um, because like I said, you're telling me some things that I didn't know. But I had speculation on. But
Yeah,
it's good to have facts to back up, my ideologies or what have you. I
yeah.
think that this conversation was great.
Thank you
Um,
so much.
you're very welcome. Thank you for coming on and sharing your awareness and what you've learned through your journey. Do you have a way for people like that may need to get in contact with you? 'Cause I know people who are dealing with certain things such as like anorexia, bulimia, cutting, and maybe
Yeah.
you could be of assistance. Do you have like social media that you want to give people or
Yes, I do. Um, so on my Instagram, I am your.nutrition.ally. And I am on Facebook as well under my own name. So yeah, you can follow me there. I also have this really awesome group that I put together. It's called Permission to Exist,
oh, that's
and
cute.
it's thank you, and it's
You're
for
welcome.
people who are in bigger bodies having a safe place to exist, where they don't have to try to take up less space in the world. And we talk about all of these things, like learning how to appreciate your body as is, learning how to listen to what your body is saying, and all of those intuitive eating concepts and things like that. And it's a really magical space. So I wanted to share that with anybody who's interested. And we can definitely work with any sort of chronic conditions people have, because there's lots of ways of handling those that don't have to do with restriction or the scale.
That is
So
amazing. What is the name of the Facebook group so they can find you?
so I have my Facebook group is called Your Weight Is Not Your Worth. Um,
Ooh,
yeah,
you ordered something, Jenna.
thank you, thank you. So I do have that right now. I'm being a little more active on my Instagram. So come follow me on Instagram because I do like that platform. And yeah, so Your Nutrition Ally is what it's called.
Awesome.
Um, yeah, but
Awesome.
thank you so much for having me. It was
Of
so awesome
course.
to talk to you.
Oh, likewise. Thank you so much, Jenna. You have been amazing and very informative. Listeners, viewers, please go follow Jenna. If you know someone else that could benefit from um, interacting with her on her platforms, I say go for it. Share each one, teach one. And again, I thank you all for tuning in to another episode of My Matters with Kay. I appreciate it. Jenna, I will definitely talk to you again. I will have you back so we can dig a little bit more deeper into this deep rooted issue that people
Oh,
don't typically speak about. But I thank you. I thank you very much.
you're welcome.